Hello, thank you for joining me on The Same Drugs, Jonathan Kay. I'm always really glad to talk to you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. This is now an international podcast because you're in Mexico.
I know. I don't know if I can claim the whole Canadian. I've been calling myself like exiled from Canada. I'm in exile, so
Okay.
I'm still very concerned about what's going on in Canada. And it's like, I obviously got really freaked out over the COVID stuff, and then more recently over how Trudeau and the media responded to the convoy.
It's
And
weird because all my life, not all my life, but like you always used to hear these Americans saying, if this happens, I'm going to move to Canada, or if that happens, I'm going to move to Canada. And like you never heard Canadians say, well, if this happens, I'm going to move out of Canada. But I actually know a few people who've done it now. Like you're I don't know that many, but you're one of them. And it's weird because Canada was always the place like people would move to when things got wacky. But now things in Canada got so wacky that people are moving away. It's like I never thought that would happen.
I never thought that would happen either. And I know a lot of people here in where I'm living in Mexico who are Canadian and left because of what was going on there politically and with the COVID restrictions and so on and so forth. And I spent my whole life being one of those like typical but probably obnoxious Canadians who just thought, we were so much better than America, and that was, I guess, the whole good thing about Canada.
Right.
And it's not like America's problems disappeared, but all of a sudden, I don't know if it seems new to me, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But it does seem like all of a sudden things in Canada have gone really badly politically to the point where I was really concerned. It's not like I'm sure some people think it's a joke, like, oh, you're exiled in Mexico, but I got really freaked out and I left because I was worried about what would happen to free speech and to my ability to
Yeah.
work and survive. And I know a lot of people who got really scared and either left or are thinking about leaving for either places like Mexico or even to the US.
There was a guy on Twitter today who was saying was asking if you had to leave Canada, where would you go? And I actually I'm nowhere. See, I'm not from Vancouver. Vancouver is its own kind of weird, but so I haven't had to make that decision. But I have a list in my head, and what I came up with was Denmark, Taiwan, and what I added to the list, which is kind of a weird entry, is if Quebec becomes independent, I think I would consider Quebec. Because
Okay.
like I used to be horrified by the idea of Quebec, and I'm from Montreal originally. And as an Anglo growing up in Montreal, I was horrified by the idea of an independent Quebec, as we're like 99% of Anglophones from Quebec. But now I'm sort of like, at least Quebecers, Quebecois, they have some confidence to them, and culturally they're not going in for a lot of the sort of social panic that the Anglos are. So I considered it. I consider moving to an independent Quebec. I have to work on my French, which is terrible, but you're
Probably
not,
better than most.
you're not fluent in Spanish, so you know. Okay,
No, I can hardly speak Spanish at all.
so there's hope for me in Quebec then.
Yeah, I mean, they do. The Quebecois seem to have more fight in them for sure. I mean,
So
for
yeah, my theory is if your own culture is like you feel it's besieged as Quebecois culture, they feel there's like 7 or 8 million French speakers on a continent of 300 or 400 million Anglos. So as a result, they're defensive, they're protective of their culture in a way that Anglophones aren't, because we feel like, well, we're the majority. Our culture, such as it is never isn't endangered. So we can afford to fall for all these fads. The stakes are a little higher if you're French, right? You can't give it up as easy. So
yeah, you're trying to protect something
yeah.
and you have something to protect. So I wonder, I mean, do you think that things in Canada have always been kind of politically, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, I find politics in Canada right now to be slightly terrifying, to be honest, because I thought after witnessing, how Trudeau dealt with the Freedom Convoy and even what happened over COVID, I was like, we're going down the communism route, which is something I would have made fun of somebody else if they'd said that up until very recently. Like, I always thought Americans' panic around communism was ridiculous. Like, the communists are coming. I'm like, oh, like, come on. Like, what do you even think a communist is?
Yeah.
But then I was like, this is starting to look like we're going to turn into China. And I certainly have no interest in living in China.
Yeah, I don't think we're going that far, but I mean, to me, part of it is the fact that, like, people forget that during Trudeau's first couple of years, he implemented a lot of stuff that socialists, or at least leftists in Canada, wanted. Like, I think the marginal tax rate for high earners in Canada went up to something like 52%. He strengthened parts of the safety net. Like, Canada became a more progressive place in a way that progressives once would have recognized, in terms of traditional things like redistribution of income. Some of his, like, the feminist stuff he did in the first few years. I mean, some people thought he went overboard, but what I think happened is, what happened in the United States is that progressivism got turned into something very different. And Canada, unfortunately, copied what happened in the United States. It talked about the Great Awakening. Unfortunately, I think the two phenomena are related, because you've got a lot of very privileged people in Canada. Like, Canada has become a very wealthy place in the last 10 or 20 years. When I was a kid, 30, 40 years ago, we'd go down to the United States, and the United States was just a richer country. Canada is now a very wealthy place. And as a result, you've got a lot of very class-conscious, wealthy people. They kind of are looking for ways to justify their entitlements. The tax rates are already very high. I think in terms of sort of standard redistribution of income stuff, there's not much they can campaign for without jeopardizing their own wealth. Marxism has lost its appeal. And so a lot of this progressive hashtag stuff has replaced it. And so, you've got this stuff, race and gender. And the other thing is, especially during COVID, there just isn't as much mixing of social classes as there used to be. As a result, like, wealthy people in Canada now talk about poor people, like, in the most appalling ways. And a lot of times it's like leftists saying that kind of stuff. So, like, one thing that really shocked me during this convoy thing was a person I know, they're older than me, incredibly successful in life, very progressive, they vote Liberal or NDP. And during a conversation, they said, well, Trudeau was right not to meet with these protesters because the protesters would have killed him. I said, what? Okay, that's crazy. And I've heard that from some other people, and these are people on the left side of the spectrum who talked about these convoy protesters as if they were all Nazis, that they were like these violent people. And I just kind of realized that a lot of these people, especially during COVID, they just don't meet working class people that much. They consider themselves leftists, but the only working class people they meet are waiters or receptionists, or maybe like Amazon drivers. And during COVID, they barely met those people, even those people. So, like, their only friends are the people they curate on their Facebook groups or their Twitter groups, who tend to be like other wealthy, privileged people. And it's weird. It's like, these are people who consider themselves friends of the downtrodden, but like, they don't actually meet any downtrodden people. And so as a result, and I think this is the phenomenon we've witnessed, because I remember when I met you, you were kind of like fairly traditional leftist.
Yeah.
To me, downtrodden, whether you're downtrodden in society, is still a function of social class. I'm fairly Marxist in that approach. But because wealthy people are not meeting a lot of downtrodden people, there's just much more division of social classes in our society now because of the way our housing works. who are the downtrodden people they meet? Well, they're meeting like film studies students, and they're meeting activists, and they're meeting, people who change their gender, or they're meeting like, Me Too celebrities, or they're meeting. It's sort of like a lot of symbolic politics, and that has kind of come to define what leftism is in Canada as much as the United States. And maybe that's why you find it unrecognizable. Like, it sounds like you felt more comfortable in a traditional left-right sphere where you were like fighting for more income equality, and I mean, like that's when I met you or encountered you journalistically. That's what I remember you as somebody who had sort of like a traditional left of center agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I had a class analysis, and my understanding of the left and my entry into the left, which happened, when I was a kid through my dad, who was a postie. He was working for Canada Post, and he was very involved in the union.
Oh, was he a CUPW?
Yeah.
Okay, those guys are kind of real communists. I've met some, like,
he was a Marxist. I mean, he identified as a Marxist. So when I grew up, I also identified as a Marxist until I switched over to being a socialist, which I thought was much more mild.
Like as you know, I used to be on the editorial board of the National Post, and the CUPW, they would come for editorial board meetings, and they would like talk like hardcore stuff, like, yeah, things are amazing in Cuba.
Yeah,
they would talk.
That's what I learned.
Che Guevara. No, but it wasn't like, this was already the early 2000s, and no one talked like that. Like, anyway, so you come by it honestly. I didn't know that about your dad.
Yeah, I mean, this was in the 80s. He went back to university and left the post office probably when I was around 13 or 14 years old. So that would have been around 1993 or 94. So this was before then. But he was a Marxist, and that was the ideology and the politics that I learned. And I was like into like the working class revolution and like fuck the rich, like fuck the bourgeoisie.
And I have more time for that stuff now, by the way, because if we're gonna fuck anybody, it might as well be rich people as opposed to like some working class truck driver who like just doesn't, maybe has a different view about masks and vaccines as the rest of us. Like, if somebody's gonna get pushed up against the wall and slapped around, or worse, let it be the rich guy in the top hat with the big bag of money. Like, I mean,
if we're going to take something, or we're going to like punish somebody financially, which is not something I would ever advocate for anyone anymore. But then,
if it's going to be anybody
wealthy, like it wouldn't be a truck driver of all people, or just like any regular, either middle class, but it probably wasn't mostly middle class, like, any like working class person who's donating to support the truckers.
That was crazy. That was just insane when they were, and I don't know if people watching this are followed that, but there was a whole doxing thing where, like, putting aside Trudeau's like BS state of emergency, which he like rescinded as soon as there was political pushback, you actually had like some freelancers who doxed the people who gave money to the convoy, and you had like these blue ticks, including Jerry Butts, who used to be the advisor to the Prime Minister, like going on Twitter and talking about they couldn't conceal their glee over these working class people and stuff who got doxxed. I couldn't believe it. It was like so ghoulish.
It was really grotesque. And and I know a couple of people who donated and were terrified, and I had wanted to talk to you about that doxing thing, because it was, there's a whole number of things that were weird about that situation, but one of the things that's weird is that it's these leftists and these like woke journalists who have been trying to construct this narrative of doxing as sort of a crime, like you get kicked off Twitter for and it's not even real doxing that they're talking about. They're talking about like sharing somebody's name, or like maybe, sharing someone's photo, or revealing who's behind a Twitter handle. Like, actually, like, doxing is an actual real thing where you put somebody's personal private information online in a way that would endanger them, right?
So I have some experience with this, because a couple of years ago, Quillette published this article about a guy who had done this this analysis of which Twitter accounts followed other Twitter accounts. and he was demonstrated, and he successfully demonstrated that a lot of the journalists who write articles that are sympathetic to Antifa, it turns out like there's a lot of Twitter connections between the journalists and these activists. And there's all kinds of explanations for this. It could be, well, okay, they're, these people are following each other, for legitimate journalistic purposes. I mean, whatever. There's a legitimate discussion about that. But the information he was reporting was public. It's like, if you retweet another account, that's public information, right? And so we published this analysis, and there were a few Antifa people who lost their mind. They said, well, this is doxing. As a result of this, there's all these like fascists who are going to come after us. And they were using terms like doxing. So this isn't doxing. This is public information. Like, it's not your home address. It's not your phone number. We're not even publishing your real name. We're just actually publishing the identity of accounts. And as you said, that was considered like the sort of like a cardinal sin. And people were saying like, but when it comes to the convoy thing, it's, as I understand, it's textbook doxing in the sense that it's like home address and phone number and credit card information in some cases, like real doxing.
Yeah, and doxing that is potentially really harmful. I mean, I think you were talking about, and it's just like, it's a weird way for journalists to operate, right? It just seems incredibly it's unethical whenever it happens, but very unethical if a journalist is doing it. Right?
I was actually happy to see some real hard pushback against that, because the Toronto Star, maybe not surprisingly, unfortunately, tried to exploit this, and like they ran an article about a doctor, I think in Hamilton, who gave money, and it turns out she didn't give the money. It was her mother who gave the money, and her mother's 86, and her mother has dementia. Like the whole story, and the Star ran a big picture of this woman, this doctor, saying, "Look, here's this doctor in Hamilton, and she's giving money to the con." Like the whole thing was so grubby, and the information they used was doxed information. The Toronto Star did not dox this woman, but basically they assigned something like 3 or 4 reporters to sift through this doxed information. They went after police officers. They went after this woman. But the pushback they received on social media was intense. I was gratified to see that. And then the Star, which presents itself as like the friend of the working class, wrote an article. The title was, "Your employee gave money to the convoy. Can you fire them?" Like, it was like a how-to guide of, can you fire your employee for giving money to the wrong cause? It was insane. And again, this is a progressive newspaper. It's supposed to be. 15 minutes ago, it was like a friend of unions, a friend of workers, a friend of blue collars. Now it's like a how-to guide, basically for plutocrats to fire people who are off-brand because they donate to an unfashionable charity. And I get like this didn't happen in Canada 5 years ago. Like, this is a new thing where progressives have become like this. And I'm not, unlike you, I'm not somebody who can say, well, I was a Marxist or a socialist when I was younger. I wasn't. And I'm very concerned about what happened to conservatism in the last 10 years with Trump. But what's happened on the left side of the spectrum is just as bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of people, I'm so done with the left, and I'm super critical of the left, and I'm so critical of the left that now people think that I'm right wing, because I don't really criticize the right that much. But that's only because I'm just so angry. I mean, first of all, I'm just not very familiar with right wing politics, because I was so always enmeshed in right wing or left wing politics that I never even thought about what the right was doing. Like, that's how like much of a political bubble I was in. But I'm so frustrated and disappointed and grossed out by what the left is doing that I'm super critical. But a lot of leftists, like, the leftists who will concede that maybe there's something going on that's bad with the left nowadays, will still say, oh, well, those aren't real leftists. This isn't the real left. The real left is this. These people are just neoliberals, or whatever weird label they want to apply to them that doesn't really matter. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, okay, maybe it's not the left of the past, but this is the left now. So this is what we're talking about. These are the people who are representing the left, and the left is no longer representing the downtrodden. You know, like you said, they're not representing working class people. They don't even know working class people. They don't know poor people. They don't really know marginalized people. They know somebody in one of their classes in university who identifies as the downtrodden, so identifies as like trans or non-binary or like a POC or something, and therefore, or a sex worker. So now they're in a position to be able to speak on behalf of all these marginalized people. But it's like, you don't know a Indigenous woman who was prostituted on the downtown east side when she was 13 years old. Like, you don't actually know. You don't know anybody who doesn't have access to education. Everybody you know is in university or university educated. Like,
yeah, and this, I mean, this is a phenomenon that's been charted for decades, and it expresses itself in housing because, you know, they've done here in Toronto. There was a massive study. University of Toronto guy did it. It's been at least a decade, but you know, it used to be very common that lawyers and doctors and school teachers and blue collar workers, like, they might live in the same neighborhood. I mean, obviously, there's always been wealthy neighborhoods and less wealthy neighborhoods. Like, that's just always been with us. But what's new is that, like, in places like Toronto or New York or Vancouver, you'll get like whole neighborhoods that are sort of like just people who independent money, finance, you know, lawyers, you know, high tech. Like, it'll be a very narrow range of highly lucrative industries, and you know, there'll just be nobody who is like a government worker or even who earns like 5 figures instead of 6 or 7 figures. There's just been much more stratification, and stratification of mate selection. You know, people now marry in grad school or undergrad, and you know, within marriages, within families, within peer groups, and also social media. People tend to inherit, like, their social media ecosystem tends to be based on the social media ecosystem they had in university. So a person's social media ecosystem tends to be, if they went to university, it's like all university educated people.
Yeah.
And I see this with some of my friends, and the reaction to the convoy here in Canada, like, you would talk to person A and they'd say, yeah, like, this convoy, it was just a bunch of Nazis. And by the way, you know, I was in a convoy accidentally. So this
that sounds like, wait, I'll finish the story. You'll be like, I was buying like my daily McDonald's breakfast.
It was totally like that. No, it was the weirdest thing. So this is true. I was in a convoy, and so I know it wasn't like a Nazi thing, because so I went cross country skiing with my family, and we were out in this place called Albion Hills, as this provincial park, and we got in our car. And we, this is so crazy. So we were driving back along the Gardiner. This means nothing to you because you're not from Toronto, but we were driving back along the Gardiner, and it was like parking lot traffic, like nothing was moving. And so I was like, this is crazy. It's the middle of the day, and it's like there's all this traffic not moving, plus all the cars around us on all these trucks, they're all honking and they have Canadian flags. Like, what's going on? And I was like, wait a sec. This is the convoy. And it had been diverted because they were supposed to go to the provincial legislature in downtown Toronto, but like the police blocked it off. And I took all these pictures. Maybe after I'll send them to you, so you could put a collage up at the end of the YouTube. And the pictures were, well, okay, some of the pictures was like a pickup truck with a big sign that said like "fuck Trudeau." Like, they some of them didn't have a lot of thought, but others were like, you know, thoughtful. It's like, you know, my body, my medicine, or, you know, they're saying I'm vaccinated, but I don't want to force other people to get vaccinated. Like, some of the signs showed that these were thoughtful people. There were tons of Canadian flags. That was like the one thing you saw everywhere, Canadian flags. I saw 0 swastikas, 0 Confederate flags. The one embarrassing thing was, like, I was driving kind of like I don't know, all these pickups, and the guy like rolled down the window and made a comment about my car, because, like, anyway, so I wanted to show him, like, you know, I'm going to honk for freedom. And I honked, but for like my car has this like really high pitched horn. So it was like, hey, check this out. Beep, beep. And it was just like so embarrassing. And the guy like rolled up his window. Like,
You had like a nerd honk or like
it was
a feminine honk,
did
maybe.
it did nothing to promote freedom. It was like, it may have even inhibited freedom by honking. But so I was in the convoy, and I know it was not a Nazi convoy. It was again. I love vaccines. I don't know if I'm pro mandate, but I'm definitely pro vax. And so when the convoy started, I was like, I was like all these people I'm making fun of. Like I was like, oh my god, these people in their trucks, it's gonna be so noisy, and why don't they like vaccines? Like I had all the normal Toronto snob reaction. And the only thing that kind of made me pro convoy a little bit was just like the over the top insane reaction from Trudeau and others to the convoy, who were treating them like it was some kind of fascistic invasion or something. And their reaction was so extreme that it made me curious about the convoy, and I started interviewing people in the convoy. And I was like, look, these people aren't that bad. I mean, the horn stuff is annoying. Like, if they honked less, that'd be good. But they weren't monsters. But when, like, I don't know if in Mexico you're reading the CBC, but it was crazy the way they were portraying these guys. Oh, and then so finally they left. Did you see that article in the CBC about phantom honking?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
that was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it was so serious. Hold on, let me find. I have like the
look up phantom honking
written down here somewhere.
And the picture of the guy, the picture. I don't want to make fun of the guy because
the trucks have left Ottawa, but phantom honking lingers for many downtown. And then the subhead is post-traumatic stress from weeks of honking is a temporary mild trauma, psychologist
It wasn't even weeks of honking. The first week they honked too much. Everyone agrees. And then people ask them to stop honking. But phantom honking is not a thing. There's honking and there's not honking. There's no such thing as phantom honking.
No, and the idea that you would claim, seriously, that you had post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what this article was claiming, from honking for a few weeks, and the honking didn't, I think there was some kind of bylaw that prevented them from honking all night. So there wasn't all these people who are like, I haven't been able to sleep in weeks. I was like, how is it possible? Like, they're not even allowed to honk all night. I don't know if maybe they were honking all night for the first few days or something like that. But that would not last for 3 weeks.
I've talked to people who had to work from home in downtown Ottawa. And I know people who said, look, the honking did get annoying. I would get annoyed. I don't like, if there was a guy outside my house honking, I'd be pissed off about it. However, a guy goes to Afghanistan and gets PTSD and comes back to Ottawa, and some dude is like, oh man, I totally know what it was like in Kandahar, because man, it's the last couple of days, the noise here has been crazy. There was a Peterbilt right outside my apartment, man. And the guy wouldn't, it's just so insane. And this was like, I think that was the worst CBC story, but some of the other stories were just absolutely. Oh, there was one story. The whole story was about two Indigenous women who wouldn't go outside their apartment in Ottawa because they were scared there'd be racist violence. And the article had nothing about there actually being racist violence. There was no racist violence. And outside their apartment, there was an Indigenous drummers circle because some of the protesters were Indigenous. That wasn't mentioned in the article. But the whole article was just about the emotional state of people who were freaked out because of reading articles like this.
The ways that people, and especially these progressives, I was interviewing Trish Wood recently, who is like a longtime Canadian journalist who went heterodox kind of, and she called them the laptop class, but I've also called them the pajama class. And I mean, you and I are in that class, so
yeah, 100%.
I feel like I'm allowed to use that. And so,
yeah.
But the way that they were talking about the convoy was just so disattached from reality in as far as I can assess reality from over here, but having talked to people who were part of the convoy, who'd, gone to various rallies, in Victoria, in Toronto, in Quebec, in Ottawa, of course, and what I was seeing in all of the footage, there was no footage that was demonstrating to me that there was any violence or that racism or fascism was prominent in any way. Like I saw a couple photos of a Confederate flag on a truck and a photo of a swastika, but that was it. But they were talking about this was the whole thing. Like there was this Nazi convoy and they were super dangerous and they were
Well,
occupying Ottawa.
but even those nutbags with the Confederate flag, and like that was like the first day or two, they kind of got thrown out. And even the guy with the swastika, he had a swastika because he had some stupid sign that was basically like Trudeau equals Hitler. Like he wasn't, it was stupid to bring a swastika, but the reason he had the swastika was because he was trying to compare the Liberals to Nazis. Didn't mean he liked the Nazis. And if you look,
he wasn't like, go Nazis, go.
No, it was the opposite. He was like, I hate Trudeau and I hate Nazis. And so Trudeau's like, it's a dumb thing to do. But
I didn't know that.
So even the one or two guys who brought swastika, now there was one legitimate anti-Semite who showed up in Toronto with a sign. He had some TV website called Goyim TV, and he was a legitimate anti-Semite, but they tore up his sign. The protesters tore up his sign and told him to go away. I actually, even in the case of anti-Semites, I don't think you should be allowed to tear up a guy's sign. But if you're going to tear up anybody's sign, it should be the guy who has an anti-Semitic website. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I talked to a few people who they're kind of like people like us who sort of just got very, very alienated from a lot of this sort of identity politics stuff. But now during the convoy, like even their narrow groups, which were supposed to be like refuges from identity politics, even those groups kind of got schismed, like divided over the issue of the convoy. And I talked to one woman. I mean, I think she was someone like you. She sort of like used to be somewhat doctrinaire on the left, but the last couple of years she's been more heterodox. And she finally found a group of sort of like-minded free-thinking dissidents, and now even that little group like started throwing people out if they were like pro-convoy. So this is why I support your decision to go to Mexico. Like, it's not so much that you can't have diverse views. Like, I think you and I are proof that you can have diverse views. It's that if you do have diverse views, so much of your energy goes into like the politics of like finer and finer slices of like the groups within which these kind of views will be tolerated, because it isn't just left right. Maybe it's because you above all people know this, your background in feminism, and you were writing about this before anybody was writing about this, what was happening in Vancouver. Like you identified that's with your early writing about, TERFs and SWERFs. And I think this happened in Vancouver before it happened everywhere else.
Yeah.
But people can't, especially during COVID, they didn't feel like they had any kind of social network they could depend on that was also a place where they could speak honestly. And it wasn't just the gender stuff. It was like, you had sort of, again, the gender apostates who had finally formed their group, and then it started getting like the convoy stuff became its own source of apostasy, and that must be exhausting. Like, I remember I'm very lucky because I can kind of, just because of Quillette, I can say what I want, but the woman was describing this stuff. It sounded awful, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I get so many messages and emails and texts from people who are still in Canada and still in the US, and some of these people are people that I know, and some of these people are people that I don't know, and they just are almost desperate because they have nobody to talk to. And I'm like, I can't be all of your friend. Like I'm not even interested in really talking about this over and over and over again. I'd like to leave my house and go talk about other things. I don't really want to talk to you about how crazy the gender stuff is all the time in my spare time. But, there's a lot of people in Canada who really feel super isolated and that they can't share their true thoughts about anybody for fear of either just social ostracization or even fear of being fired or worse.
But can I ask you a question about that? Because you're obviously closer to this than me. My sense is that sanity is starting to return to the gender debate. And as a result of that, some of these so-called gender crit groups, they feel like they can kind of afford to branch out into other subjects. Like it used to be like, well, if you're a gender crit, we all have to stick together. But now, the years have passed, and I think people are starting to see the light a little bit on some of this like gender stuff. And as a result, you've got these gender crit groups that are like, well, we can afford to sort of create other dogmas. Like, you have to think this or you have to think that. I mean, I've heard through the grapevine of some of these gender crit groups like splitting up over other issues, which I guess is a good sign that they're talking about other issues. Like it means maybe they feel they can afford to talk about other issues.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't seem as pressing. I mean, it's true. Like it's been very frustrating to me because I feel like when you've gone through what so many women like myself and women that I know have gone through in terms of just trying to talk about this trans stuff and been, like harassed and threatened and bullied and banned and silenced and ostracized and all of this. And then when it comes to the issue of free speech in other contexts, or when it comes to political orthodoxy or ideological orthodoxy in other contexts, they somehow don't make the connection and are still taking this, oh, you think this, you say this, you spoke to this person, you're bad, you're out. And it definitely happened over the COVID thing and over the convoy thing.
Yeah.
And, when it happened to me, I mean, I was essentially ousted. I sort of just stopped caring about, I would rather just be ousted just so I can just be myself and not worry about being ousted anymore. So I've been ousted. I wasn't just, ousted and ostracized by, the social media bigwigs or the left or the, liberal feminists or the trans activists or whoever. But it's also now it's like I've been ousted and ostracized and vilified by feminists, and many of whom were the feminists that I was working with and allied with for many, many years, over first the prostitution thing and then over the gender identity thing. But because in large part, not only because of this, but in large part because of my position on the COVID restrictions, because of my position on free speech, because of my position on civil liberties, and because now my support for the convoy.
But the COVID stuff, so again, I'm ignorant about this. You mean like you weren't adequately hard ass enough about like lockdowns and masks and vaccines? Is that what you mean?
I was critical of the mandates and the restrictions. Okay. I wasn't critical necessarily of the vaccines per se, but I was definitely critical of the mandates and of the vaccine passports. I honestly never really even thought about vaccines before in my life. I just get vaccines when somebody tells me to get a vaccine.
I'm like that too. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, sure. And so, but I did, like I had concerns over the vaccine being rushed and I wanted to know what I was putting in my body, but it was more that I just wanted other people to have the choice. That's my approach now to life and culture and policy and legislations is that I want people to be able to make free and informed choices. And so I was opposed to the COVID restrictions. I was opposed to the lockdowns. After a certain point at the beginning, I was totally just stay in your house for 2 weeks and stop being a baby. And all this conspiracy theory nonsense, like this is all ridiculous. And I sort of switched views. Partly just from interviewing people who had different perspectives than me. So I saw things from a different perspective and that opened my mind. I mean, interviewing people is always really helpful in that way, I find. I'm sure you find that also. You often go in with a certain idea and come out with a totally different view and you surprise yourself. But also from moving to Mexico and just being around a larger diversity of people that wasn't my Vancouver bubble, and talking to those people and being like, oh, these concerns are legitimate and these concerns make sense. So from being critical of the restrictions and the mandates, and then from really, I supported the convoy from the get-go. I thought it was awesome. I was really proud of Canada and Canadians for once, and people acted like I was some kind of Nazi or alt-right figure or whatever. But I mean, people have been calling me that forever, so I don't super care. But it is frustrating because it's like, how are you knee-jerking like this when this has happened to you? Because this is how I came. Part of the way that I came to support free speech was because my free speech was censored, and I hate that that's the way that I had to realize that free speech was important. But that's the truth.
But so I've had this problem on the right side of the spectrum, because so recently there was a U.S. state that, I forget if they did it or they tried to. It was a Republican state. I think they advanced legislation that would ban gender studies being taught in university.
Okay.
And I kind of got into a debate with people, conservatives online, where I said, look, obviously I'm not crazy about a lot of the stuff they teach in gender studies, but I'm also not comfortable with state governments telling universities that they're like not allowed to teach a subject. And to me, that goes too far. By the way, the same thing is like, obviously I'm horrified by Russia invading Ukraine. But on the other hand, like some of the stuff I see, where, you know, like contracts of, say, Russian hockey players just like canceled overnight, or you know, like some Russian guy who's lived in the United States like for 5 years and has nothing to do with stuff in Russia, and is like, you know, a joint venture gets canceled and his business goes bankrupt, and like I find it's very difficult to meet people, and maybe even in my own mind, to be completely consistent that like cancel culture is bad, targeting people because of their beliefs, their affiliations is bad. I mean, as much as I try and sort of like insist on consistency among others, it's tempting to, you know, when you believe in a cause, like obviously we believe that this Russian invasion of Ukraine is a terrible thing. It's very tempting to say, well, I'm going to make an exception for like anybody who's Russian, like, you know, who's living in Canada, like, yeah. And so when you say like some of these people who have been victimized on the gender stuff, and then like they themselves use the same tactics to go after their opponents, I think that's actually human nature, unfortunately. I know very few people who are consistent when it comes to like classic liberal principles of like tolerating other opinions. Most of us apply that one way.
I mean, I don't tolerate everyone else's opinions in my head, but I do. I think I have, at least now I just sound like I'm bragging, but like I think I have come to a point where I'm like, no, I'm not canceling anybody. Like everybody should be able to say what they want to say. I mean, and like well, not if you're threatening to kill somebody. That my limit is actual legitimate threats of genocide or violence.
It's a high bar. By the way, one thing I will say is one way I've kept my sanity is just by being with people who are completely apolitical. Like one good thing about the disc golf community is like no one cares about. So it's like you'll say things like,
I feel like sorry to interrupt. I feel like you always bring up like the nerdiest examples. You're like, one great thing about the board game community.
Oh,
like,
okay.
One great thing.
Well, actually, so I love board games, but one reason the board game community is like problematic is like the Dungeons and Dragons community is like super progressive.
Oh, okay.
Like they have like gender fluid characters in their dungeons and stuff, which I mean, it's fine. Whatever. If you want that in your dungeon, that's fine. But then you'll get like the hardcore war game community, which is like a lot of them were into Trump stuff and like super conservative. Not all of them, but then disc golf is different. Disc golf is like very apolitical, and no one really wants to talk politics. And even if you did talk politics, like remember there's one guy I said, where he mentioned something about provincial politics, and I said, well, who are you voting for? And he said, well, I don't know, who usually wins these things. like that was his knowledge, like it's a sports team. It's like, well, I guess I'll vote for the winning team.
This is my best bet.
Yeah. But then we go through, I remember recently I spent a whole day with these guys, and like they were talking about, they were bitching about their exes. They were talking about like the best formula for hash brownies. We talked a lot about disc golf. Talked a little bit about celebrities and movies, and like, what's that? The fighting thing, MMA.
I've gotten like weirdly like pretty into MMA over the
all
past
of you people
year.
are into it. Yeah,
I did, but I
like,
think it's awesome. I love it now.
Everyone who has like heterodox political opinions likes cryptocurrency and MMA. Are you into Bitcoin?
I'm trying to get into Bitcoin. Like I really, really want to understand. And
Right.
yeah, and everyone I know who is into all the same things that I'm into and into like wrong think and heterodoxy and whatever is like pretty into crypto. So I agree with you.
I feel you have to get into crypto. Okay.
Yeah.
But so you're in a cult. It's like, well, they're all no, but it's like they're all wearing saffron robes, so I guess I should wear a saffron robe. And so can I say I got into crypto because of Trudeau?
Yeah, like I mean, I was wanting to figure it out prior, and people were telling me to figure it out, but because of this, like the attack on the financial persecution of people, I was like, okay, I really have to figure out Bitcoin because I could be cut off.
My crypto is literally in this. This thing is literally because of Trudeau.
Oh, okay.
It's called Ledger.
Okay.
And what you were saying, I had the same thing, like that if we now have the state of emergency where, like you said, like you can just get your bank assets frozen because you gave $20 to like Truckosaurus or whatever, like I want to get into crypto. And so I went online and I found this guy who like just taught me everything. And I found there's different ways to do it. You don't have to have a physical device, but there's this device called the Ledger. And if you want to completely control your crypto assets, your private keys, I think I'm getting that right, your private keys for accessing your funds on the blockchain are contained in this. It's like a USB drive, and it's so cool. I feel like James Bond. And I made it fully anonymous.
Like James Bond now.
I went to an ATM to make it like super anonymous, so I wasn't like on Wealthsimple or something like that. And I now have crypto in this thing, and I can like
inside that
it's inside. Well, okay, it's not. I can't like spray crypto. The way it works is, yeah, when I send people, I Bluetooth it to my phone, and it transmits my, I think it's called my private key. I understood it when the guy was explaining to me. And what's so cool about this is if I lose it, I can recover all my crypto with a 24-word key.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, anybody with this,
like with a paragraph, any
person with this 24-word key can access all my blockchain, all my funds. They can get a device like this. And if you knew if I said those 24 words to you,
I'd be rich.
Well, I don't have that much crypto, but, and yet this just made it cooler to me. I was like, oh, cool. But so when I got it, I thought I could pick the 24 words. So I went through like my favorite book, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take the first word from this chapter and the third word from this chapter. But then I read the instructions and they give you the words. So like so it's like a waste of time. But I had the 24 words and I wrote them down, and it's in a hiding place. And the whole thing feels so cloak and dagger. And the only reason I did any of this is because of this idiot move by our Prime Minister deciding that he was going to declare a state of fucking emergency because of honking. And as a result, he was going to freeze people's money. And I said, you know what? For like 10 years, I've been trying to get off my ass on crypto. And Justin Trudeau got me to do it. And now I have this cool thing, this hipster thing. And you don't need this to do crypto. You could just go on like Coinbase or Wealth Simple or whatever and start your own crypto account. The problem is then it's not totally anonymous because you have like your name is attached to the account, there's credit cards. But when you do it for this thing, I should be a sponsor. I should get money for this.
You should get money for this. You should, well, crypto.
LEDGER. And if you order today, I'm going to give you like the first 20 words of my 24-word key.
This is, I mean, I'm interested. I have a crypto wallet, which I got because a friend of mine was like, you should set up a crypto wallet so that people can donate to you in Bitcoin if they want to. And I was like, okay, sure. But I never really understood it or did anything with it or pushed it.
It's on your phone, right?
And well, I mean, it's, well, like it's on my computer and I'm pointing at my laptop. Like it's in there.
All your money's there. Okay.
But like, I mean, but after what Trudeau did in terms of freezing people's bank accounts and cutting off people's access to, you know, all of their credit cards and money, I was like, okay, I really actually need to start pushing, you know, because all of my income, I always feel like, should I really admit this in public? All of my income comes through independent donations, you know, like I don't have a job. Like the only way that I make a living is just by people who, like my audience who supports me. I don't have ads or, you know, funders, or I'm not sponsored. And yeah, I don't work for anybody. I don't have like side gigs or anything like that. And I was like, you know, I am a wrong thinker and I could get cut off clearly. So I was like, I should start focusing on, you know, trying to get crypto. So
well, there are YouTubers who got cut off, and you know, there's people on PayPal, and so yeah, I don't blame you. I think it's the only problem. So I found this. I spent like a whole day investigating this crypto stuff. The problem is like 90% of it is at this super high like crypto dude level, where they just talk this language that like I have no idea what they're talking about, and they're not even Bitcoin. There's like a million of them, Ethereum and G coin and S coin, and like it's and they talk this other language. There are a few podcasts that are like Bitcoin for idiots, and they can be informative, but I almost feel like I'm too late. Like this subculture is so richly developed that it's almost impossible to keep up.
I'm told that it's not too late. I know like quite a few people over here in Sayulita actually who are pretty into crypto, and they keep trying to help me understand it. And I'm like, my brain is like, does not compute. Right. But it's not too late. It would have been ideal if we'd gotten in, you know, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or I don't even know the.
Oh my God, we'd be
wealthy now. Like we'd be rich. Yeah. But we can still do it. But yeah, I mean, I guess. Like, so what do you think? So obviously, I don't know, for those watching who don't know, the Emergencies Act was invoked and then revoked last week. I assume because Trudeau realized he was going to get sued over that and that he wouldn't win in court. Is that what you think happened?
I think the more proximate cause was that his own Senate. So the Canadian Senate, which is not like the American Senate, the Canadian Senate is usually a largely ornamental institution and kind of rubber stamps whatever the Commons tells it the legislation is. But it looked like his invocation of the Emergencies Act, which would have been the enabling legislation for a lot of this stuff, the Senate wasn't going to pass it, and he was going to be embarrassed by that. And so, well, just a quick summary of this, like the Emergencies Act, for those who aren't Canadian who didn't follow it, it hadn't ever been invoked, and even its predecessor legislation, the last time it had been invoked was in 1970 for a major terrorist crisis. Before that, it had been invoked for things like, you know, World War II, World War I, and invoked for like terrible reasons, like to throw Japanese and Ukrainian people into internment camps and stuff like that. And so this law hadn't been used in decades. Even its predecessor law hadn't been used in decades, and it was used for, you know, basically a parking enforcement issue and honking problem in Ottawa. And as part of the law, he had to go to Parliament to justify it. And he whipped the vote among his own party, and the leftist NDP whipped the vote. And so on a party line vote, they were able to ram this thing through. And then 2 days later, when he realized he's going to be humiliated in his own, and the Senate wasn't going to vote for it, I think that's the leading theory, he decided, oh, this is 2 days after he forced his members of parliament to vote for it. He said, no, emergency's over. The whole thing was so mortifying. Yeah. And what a cheap and grubby way to get rid of people's civil liberties. And again, I wasn't joking about this crypto thing. If that's the low bar that's required to erase people's civil liberties in Canada, I don't think we're not communist China. We're not like, Canada's still a free country. I still love it here, but that was a wake up call for a lot of people, right? Because even if you thought Trudeau was a boob, and even if you didn't like him, and I mean, I voted for Trudeau. I'd admit that. I thought he had a successful first term, and you never thought he was like a fascist. Or he had autocratic tendencies, or he had this like mean streak where he was going to freeze the bank accounts of working class people because they donated to the wrong cause. Like, that was never who he was.
No, I mean, I just thought he was nothing really. I didn't think he was dangerous. I just thought he was sort of a progressive figurehead. Like, it's like, I'm just a really nice guy, like kind of useless, but not dangerous, not going to take away people's civil liberties because they support, protest that he is, I don't know, a threat to him, or is critical of him, or he's just going to, ban people from society because they don't agree with his policies.
It was weird, and it was very off-brand. I think he was humiliated because when the protesters came to Ottawa, he had kind of a choice. I think what would have been truer to his original political brand was maybe he would have met them. He would have said, well, we can disagree. Like, people forget he began his political career in Quebec, and he began it in a heavily separatist riding. And he would talk to separatists. He would go door to door, and he'd meet separatists, and he'd say, well, we disagree, but maybe we agree on this, and maybe we can find common ground. I mean, these are people who wanted to break up the country, and Trudeau found a way to, in some cases, get their votes. And so when these guys who were against vaccine mandates, when they came to Ottawa, there was no reason he couldn't have said, well, I disagree with you, but I'm going to give you, half an hour of my time, and we'll meet. Like, he could have treated them with respect, and instead he made a political calculation that he was going to treat them like scum, and he was going to, his party was going to signal boost this nonsense about how they were all radicals. And I mean, to be fair, there was one or two leaders, this guy, I think Pat Pape or whatever his name, not Pat Pape. Anyway, I mean, it's absolutely true that there were a few leaders who were some bad apples and radicals, but they were like a very small fraction of it. And once he went down that road, he couldn't go back. Like, I think he thought, well, I'll dismiss them as scum, and then the first weekend will pass and I'll go home. But they didn't go home. And then, the days passed. It was 1 week, and then 2 weeks, and 3 weeks. He was humiliated because he had backed himself into a corner where he said, these are not legitimate political actors, so I'm not going to talk to them. And on the other hand, the police aren't dealing with this. What the hell am I going to do? So in this desperate bid to look in some way like he was being decisive, or in some way that he was relevant, he invoked the Emergencies Act, and it was a dumb move. And I think there was even among some principled, we've been bashing the left. There were some principled progressives in Canada who really did push back, including people who, like, maybe you and I would normally not have time for. You might know that there's like this loose cannon on left-wing Canadian Twitter called Nora Loretto, who is like, I come to praise Nora Loretto. She actually, her credit, I mean, usually on Twitter, like,
it speaks to your humility that you can say something nice about Nora Loretto.
I look, normally, like, her Twitter is like, what's the opposite of what like a sane person would say? She says some crazy things. However, on this, to her credit, this person who like her brand is like there's nothing to the left of Nora Loretto. She like defines the furthest left thing you could possibly say or be on Canadian social media. To her credit, she says this is not right. Like this, and there were other progressives. You know, this guy. Do you remember Stuart Parker from BC?
I know Stuart Parker. I'm friends with him on Facebook, so I actually saw that he was posting some really helpful stuff in response to what Trudeau was doing.
So Stuart Parker, he's like old as the hills. He's like me. And he said, when I was young, we'd have these environmentalist green, not Green Day, but like not Greenpeace either, or like Earth Day parades in Vancouver. And he'd say, like, you know, you'd have a parade.
The Peace March. I think he talked about the Peace March. I went to the Peace March in Vancouver with my dad.
Of course you did. So
of course I did.
And he said like 90% of it were people like you know, like your standard Marxist Fruit Loops. But then you get like some guy with like a North Korean flag, and some guy would show up with like a hammer and sickle, and some guy would like show up naked because he was a nudist, and some guy would be like free Abu Jamal. Like you just get like hundreds of sort of hangers on with crazy flags, and because it was a protest. Protests attract like people protesting things. And you don't look at it and say, oh, there's a guy with a hammer and sickle. He must be a Stalinist who wants to throw people into gulags, right? You'd say this is basically a left-wing march that attracts some, you know, I don't know, maybe you had the hammer.
No, but I think almost all protests, unless they're super well organized, people will show up to talk about their niche issues. So they're going to be like, meat is murder, or whatever. Maybe they'll be anti-Semites.
Or
maybe
some
kind of radicals and lots of crazy people.
He's just an anti-social people. Like there are several photographs of Justin Trudeau campaigning where people brought Nazi flags. In fact, in Calgary, I think it was in Calgary, Justin Trudeau actually signed a Nazi flag because some nut job actually like hid the swastika part and said, will you sign this? And there's a video of it. And Trudeau being, you know, like any politician, he said, oh, sure, I'll sign it. And then like after you see the guy grinning with his stupid Nazi flag, like all of these events attract crazy people. And Stuart Parker in this piece, and he wrote a great piece for Quillette, he said, look, if you are willing to say that any protest or march or whatever, or parade that has like a couple of nut jobs who show up, that like those people define the parade, and you could like outlaw the movement or freeze bank accounts on the basis of what a few crazy people do in a grassroots protest movement, you've basically eliminated the right of progressives to protest. I mean, he didn't say this, but I'll say it. Like Antifa, like what Antifa march doesn't have a guy in a mask doing something illegal? Or, you know, Black Lives Matter, I think their founding charter, maybe not their charter, but, you know, they're against capitalism, they're against the nuclear family. And I don't know, some of them have said weird things about Palestinian rights and the Middle East. And like, it's like any protest movement where there are people, most of them people say sensible things and a few people say crazy things. Indigenous protesters, there's been, you know, tearing down statues. There was an Indigenous protest event out in BC a few weeks ago where a guy with an axe attacked an RCMP station. Does that mean all Indigenous protesters are like violent? Of course not. But Parker made the point that if you define these movements by their baddest apples, you're going to be able to outlaw everything. Yeah. And the people who are going to suffer most are progressives, because it's rare that we get a right-wing protest event, as with the convoy. What's more usual is we get progressive protest events, and they're the people. So anyway, so Nora Loretto, Stuart Parker, Canadian Civil Liberties Association, like there were progressive voices that asserted themselves, and I think that stung Trudeau more than conservatives pushing back on him. So, you know, there's hope for Canada yet, Megan. Maybe you'll come back one day.
I hope so. I mean, I mean, I guess I wonder if you finally, I'll let you go. I know it's super late for you over there. I mean, what impact do you think this is going to have on Trudeau's reputation and career?
See, the thing is, so Trudeau's been in power for 3 terms now. There have been so many times where people say, oh, he's finished, he's done. Do you remember Elbowgate?
No.
So you don't even remember it. It was this thing where Trudeau, there was like some.
Was this like big on Twitter and I missed it
No,
because
it
I'm
was big
banned from
on
Twitter?
newspapers. It was big in the media. It was this thing where
Elbowgate.
Trudeau, there was this whole like kerfuffle on the floor of Parliament over some procedural issue. And Trudeau, this was a couple of years ago, and Trudeau was like kind of like getting angry. And he was like walking around trying to, I don't know, whip his caucus or something. And his elbow accidentally hit an NDP female member of Parliament, like in her, I don't know, her shoulder or her chest or whatever. And of course, the NDP leader at the time, this was before Jagmeet Singh. God, what was his name? The guy from Quebec. I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, he made like this huge big deal about it, and everyone called it Elbowgate. And they said, Trudeau's honeymoon is over thanks to Elbowgate. Like this will end his reputation as a feminist, and like a week later, everyone forgot about it, right?
Yeah.
And already you see people forgetting about the convoy stuff because of Ukraine.
Right.
Like,
the news cycle, man.
and not to compare Trudeau with Trump, but like how many times during Trump's presidency did you hear people say, that's it, Trump, he's finished, he's going to have to resign, like he's going to be impeached, the Republicans are going to abandon him, Pence is going to resign. Like I heard that from my in-laws, because my in-laws, I mean, I don't like Trump, but my in-laws hated him. And like every week my in-laws would be like, that's it, Trump's over, this is it, like, you know, he's going to be thrown in prison. And it never happened, because these people, you know, politicians have hardcore supporters. They ignore I mean, you've seen maybe Canadian Twitter. Like Trudeau also had tons of defenders among like these hardcore liberals. Like he could do no wrong. So I'm not sure this is curtains for Trudeau's career, but my God, in the international press, he's took a licking. Like,
oh yeah, I mean
Bill Myers. Do you see Bill Myers' clip on him?
Oh yeah. I
That
mean,
was
I mean, I remember posting stuff and being like, the world is watching. And it was sort of like, regardless of what I see all of my Canadian progressive friends saying, which was not good, you know, like my feed is populated by these bougie Canadian progressives, because these are all the people I know from Vancouver and went to high school with and went to university with, and you know what I mean? And but watching the international coverage and what people were saying about him and what was going on throughout the world, I was like, dude, like you're not getting the support that maybe you are, that progressive Canadians think you are, just because of what they're seeing in their algorithm.
And this is one of the rare instances where the international media actually cared about Canada. I got to write a piece about it for the Wall Street Journal, and another piece.
I read it. It was good.
And for the Washington Post, which never happens. Like it's not like Wall Street Journal editors are like, "Hey, John, tell us about like equalization," or you know, like it's so they paid attention. And I tell people, I said, the timing is bad, because typically someone like Trudeau, if he didn't run for another term, which he probably doesn't want to, like it's just who wants this job, you know, he could like go take some kind of job at I don't know, OECD or WHO or some UN refugee, like, but now he can't do that because his reputation has been tarnished. So Canada's kind of stuck with him. He's going to be like, I don't know, he's going to head up some kind of Canadian. You know what? I think what's going to happen is, you know, that all that turning me into we, Craig Kielburger stuff. I think he's going to become the new face of that. I think that's his new thing. Like, because he can't do it internationally now. I think he's become so tarnished internationally. I think Canada is now stuck with him, which maybe that's going to keep you in Mexico, unfortunately.
Oh, that'll definitely keep me in Mexico, but I don't know if that's unfortunate.
So this episode has been brought to you by Ledger.
I think you really should try to get a sponsorship, because you've done a very good job selling this thing that I don't
fully understand the product is the problem. I think I need to learn more about the product. I think.
Well, good luck. I mean, I'm still gonna keep trying to figure out all this Bitcoin stuff.
The Bitcoin is inside.
My brain just totally shuts down. I'm like, nope.
Yeah, it's somehow it's inside, and I can buy things, but I'm just not fully aware of how to do it. I like carrying it
Just
around.
crack it open and check out all your crypto.
It's gonna
Spread it out on the table.
check this.
1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4.
Yeah. No,
You're
it doesn't
rich.
work like. I know it doesn't work like that, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for talking with me about this. I always really enjoyed talking to you about pretty much anything, and I'm very glad that you're nocturnal. Okay.
It has a digital display.
Low battery, John.
Oh shit! I'm gonna lose all my crypto.
Plug it in before you lose all your crypto.
I gotta go. Okay, bye, Megan.
Okay, thanks again. Have a good night.
Bye.